For 35 years he moved through America like a shadow. Not one city, not 5 states, but 19. Not one victim, not 20, but by his own account. 93. He didn't use guns, he didn't use knives, he used his hands, manual strangulation, and because of who he chose, women society looked away from, he operated with impunity. Decades passed, investigations went cold, and Samuel Little kept killing. Welcome to Secrets Uncovered. This is episode 4, Samuel Little. Samuel Little was born Samuel McDowell on June 7, 1940 in Reynolds, Georgia, a small town in the Cotton Belt. His mother, Bessie May, was 19. His father, Paul McDowell, was 19. Neither was prepared for parenthood. Within months, the family moved north to Lorain, Ohio, but Samuel's mother had her own demons, and soon she abandoned him. He was raised by his grandmother, a woman of discipline and faith, but the damage was done. Samuel Little would later claim that his sexual fantasies began in kindergarten. The trigger, watching his teacher adjust her collar, fingers brushing her neck. That image ignited something in him. He started collecting true crime magazines, obsessing over stories of strangulation. By adolescence, the fantasies weren't occasional, they were constant. At 16, he was already in trouble. Breaking and entering in Omaha, Nebraska, earned him his first stay in a juvenile facility. His mother was listed as whereabouts unknown on the booking card. By 1961, back in Ohio, he was arrested for burglary again. He served 3 years. When he was released in 1964, he tried to rebuild. He moved to Florida to live with his mother. He worked as a cemetery worker, then as an ambulance attendant, work that kept death close, work that normalized it. But Samuel Little couldn't stay still. By 1975, he had been arrested 26 times across 11 different states. Theft, assault, attempted rape, fraud. Each time he slipped through, each time he moved on, and each time the violence was escalating, focused increasingly on women. Samuel Little's technique was distinctive, the choke and stroke killer. He used no weapons, only his hands, manual strangulation. He would approach women, usually sex workers, addicts, transients, and offer them a drink, a ride, a place to sleep. Then he would overpower them. The strangulation was gradual. Little called it a stroke, the rhythmic motion of his hands around their throats. He watched them struggle, he felt their pulses fade. Then, when life left their bodies, he would often pose them, arranging their limbs, dumping them in remote locations where animals and weather would erase the evidence. And here's what made him so difficult to catch. He understood the system. Medical examiners, faced with decomposed bodies of women with drug histories, would rule the deaths as overdoses or natural causes. Strangulation leaves minimal marks on decomposing tissue. Gunshot and stab wounds are obvious. Strangulation isn't not when time has done its work. Little's first confirmed murder came in 1970, Homestead, Florida. Manual strangulation of a marginalized woman. Body dumped, death misclassified. He was 30 years old. He would continue killing for another 35 years. Little told investigators, "I knew they wouldn't be missed right away, and I knew I could get out of town." He was right. He operated in a matrix of institutional failure. Police departments that didn't share information, medical examiners who saw what they expected to see, and a society that had already written off his victims as disposable. Of the 93 murders Samuel Little confessed to, the FBI has confirmed at least 60 women whose cases were closed, solved, or connected to him through DNA, sketches, and corroborating evidence. Carol Linda Alford, age 41, July 13, 1987, South Central Los Angeles. Her body was found nude from the waist down in an alley. She had defensive wounds. Her fingernails scraped skin from her attacker DNA that would sit in a database for 25 years waiting. The official cause of death, manual strangulation with blunt force trauma. But without a suspect, the case went cold. Audrey Nelson Everett, age 35, August 14, 1989. Los Angeles, found in a dumpster behind a nightclub. No identification. She had suffered repeated head trauma before the strangulation. A woman with a history of substance abuse living on the margins. The police file gathered dust. Guadalupe Duarte Apodaca, age 46. September 3, 1989, abandoned auto repair shop in industrial LA. a boy discovered her body while kicking a soccer ball against a wall. She had been posed, kneeling as if in prayer. Sexual assault indicated, again manual strangulation, again no witnesses, again no investigation beyond the initial report. 3 women in Los Angeles across 2 years, same method, same victimology. But Los Angeles in the late 1980s was dealing with crack epidemics, gang violence, thousands of missing persons reports. 3 marginalised women strangled didn't trigger the investigation that might have connected the dots. Melinda Rose Laprie, aged 22, Pascagoula, Mississippi. September 1982, she disappeared. Her body was found months later. Little was questioned, a grand jury convened, but witnesses barely knew him. Their testimony was shaky. In 1982, the grand jury declined to indict. Little walked free. He killed again. Patricia Ann Mount, aged 26, Alachua County, Florida, September 1982. Multiple witnesses placed Little with her. She had been violently attacked, stab wounds to her face, jaw and chest. Strangled this time, he faced trial in 1984, but the defence shredded witness credibility, exploiting racial tensions and mistrust in the community. The jury acquitted. Samuel Little walked away. Denise Christie Brothers, aged 32, mother of 2, Odessa, Texas, January 1994. Little would later plead guilty to her murder in December 2018. Mary Jo Payton, aged 21, Cleveland, Ohio, 1984. Her body was found in an abandoned factory basement. She wasn't identified until 1992, 8 years after her death, when a thumbprint matched the FBI database. 8 years. Little had killed dozens more in those 8 years. Rose Evans, aged 32. Cleveland, August 1991. From Binghamton, New York, she had left home at 17, strangled, dumped in a vacant lot. Annie Lee Stewart, aged 33, Cincinnati, Ohio, October 1981. Dumped in woods outside Grove City. Little would be convicted of her murder in August 2019, 38 years after he killed her. The pattern is overwhelming. Transient victims, misconnections between states, cases going cold because no one was looking for connections. Samuel Little understood this. He counted on it. Throughout the 1980s and 1990s, Little moved constantly. California, Texas, Florida, Ohio, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, Louisiana, Tennessee, Arkansas, Nevada, Maryland, Nebraska, Arizona, Kansas, Illinois, Indiana. He travelled like a predator following prey, staying in cheap motels, homeless shelters, occasionally with girlfriends. He had a long-term relationship with a woman named Aurelia Dorsey in Los Angeles. She supported them both through shoplifting. She knew things about him maybe more than anyone else, but she died in 1988 from a brain hemorrhage. Little claimed she was the only woman he ever loved, but her death removed the one person who might have reported his activities, might have noticed a pattern. Little kept a low profile. He worked menial jobs, cemetery work, ambulance driving, moving constantly. He was arrested periodically, petty crimes, minor assaults, but never for murder. The system kept failing upward. Local jails, short sentences, release, move to a new state, kill again. And the bodies accumulated, dozens of Jane Does across America, women whose names were unknown, whose families had stopped asking or never had families to ask. Medical examiners ruled them overdoses, natural causes, undetermined, without trauma that screamed homicide. There was no homicide investigation. Samuel Little knew this. He counted on it. He didn't stop until 2005. By then he was 65 years old. His health was failing. Diabetes, heart disease, the physical toll of decades of hard living. Whether he lost the physical ability to kill or simply lost the urge is unknown. But he stopped. And for 7 years he lived quietly, just another homeless man, just another aging ex-con with a rap sheet and health problems. On September 5th, 2012, that quiet ended. Samuel Little was arrested at the Wayside Christian Mission homeless shelter in Louisville, Kentucky. The charge wasn't murder, it was a narcotics warrant from California. Extradition paperwork routine, except it wasn't routine, the DNA was waiting. Samuel Little was 72 years old when the handcuffs finally closed for good. Extradited to Los Angeles, he faced something he hadn't faced in decades, DNA evidence connecting him to 3 murders from the 1980s. Carol Linda Alford, Audrey Nelson, Everett, Guadalupe, Duarte, Apodaca. 3 cold cases, 3 bodies with DNA scraped from fingernails, collected from clothing, preserved in evidence freezers for 25 years. The technology had advanced, the statutes hadn't run, murder has no statute of limitations, and Samuel Little's genetic code swabbed during his arrest triggered matches across the California database. The trial began in September 2014. Little maintained his innocence throughout, 3 counts of first-degree murder. The prosecution presented the DNA evidence, undeniable matches. They brought in testimony from surviving victims, women Little had attacked but not killed. One of them, a woman named Donna, had escaped from Little's car in 1984 after he attacked her. She testified to his violence, his method, his distinctive approach. The defense argued the DNA proved sexual contact, not murder, that the deaths could have been overdoses, that the women had died from other causes after consensual encounters. But the pattern was undeniable, the same method, the same victimology, the same MO across 3 deaths separated by 2 years. On September 25, 2014, the jury returned its verdict, guilty on all counts. 3 consecutive life sentences without possibility of parole. At sentencing, Little screamed, "I didn't do it," but the conviction stood. America's most prolific serial killer was finally behind bars for life. Except Southern California only knew about 3 murders. They didn't know about the other 90. They didn't know they had captured a monster orders of magnitude worse than anything their investigation had uncovered. Texas Ranger James Holland understood something about interrogation that many detectives miss. Confession isn't about pressure, it's about rapport. You want a man to tell you his darkest secrets, you don't threaten him, you befriend him. Holland began visiting Little in Los Angeles County Prison in 2018, week after week, month after month. For 18 months he sat with Little talking about boxing, about travel, about women, building trust, building a relationship, offering something no one else had offered, recognition, attention, a chance to be important. In May 2018, Little began to talk, at first hints, then details, then full confessions delivered calmly, almost proudly as he walked investigators through murders that spanned 4 decades and 19 states. He named victims the FBI had never connected. He described locations with photographic precision. He remembered names, dates, clothes, jewellery, details that only the killer could know. The confessions poured out over months. 93 murders in total by Little's count. The FBI would eventually confirm at least 60 women whose cases had been cold for decades, solved by the confessions of their killer. Little drew sketches, 26 detailed portraits of his victims rendered from memory. The FBI released them publicly, displaying them on their website, asking for help identifying Jane Does. The drawings were remarkably detailed, clear evidence of Little's photographic memory, his obsession with his victims. At least one sketch led directly to a cold case being solved in Akron, Ohio. A previously unidentified woman finally received her name. Why did he confess? Multiple reasons. First, practical. He wanted to transfer from Los Angeles County Prison to federal custody where conditions were better. Second, psychological. He craved attention. 35 years of anonymous killing, and finally someone was listening to him, treating him as important. Third, mortality. He knew he was dying. The diabetes, the heart disease. He wanted to clear his conscience. In December 2018, Little pleaded guilty to the murder of Denise Christie brothers in Odessa, Texas. He received his 4th life sentence. In 2019, he was extradited to Ohio to face charges for multiple murders in Cleveland, Cincinnati, and Akron. He was convicted of the murders of Annie Lee Stewart and Mary Jo Payton in August 2019, then convicted of Zena Marie Jones's murder in Tennessee. Each conviction brought closure to families who had waited decades for answers. Texas Ranger Holland's technique became legendary in law enforcement circles, a masterclass in extracting truth without force. Little had killed for 35 years with impunity, but Holland unlocked him in 18 months, not with threats, with patience. Samuel Little's story isn't just a story of a killer, it's the story of a system that allowed him to operate for decades, systemic failures at every level. The medical examiners who ruled strangulation deaths as overdoses because decomposed tissue hides ligature marks, the police departments who didn't share information across state lines because there was no national database connecting cases, the investigators who didn't prioritise marginalised victims because society had already written them off. Race played a role. Many of Little's victims were black women. In the 1980s and 1990s, investigations involving black victims, particularly poor, addicted or sex working black women, received less resources, less media attention, less urgency. It's an uncomfortable truth, but it's a truth nonetheless. The near misses are staggering. In 1984, he was tried for the murder of Patricia Ann Mount and acquitted. In 1982, a Mississippi grand jury declined to indict him for Melinda Rose Lepre's murder. He was arrested repeatedly for assaults, attempted rapes, attacks on women. Each time the charges were reduced, each time he served short sentences, each time he moved on and killed again. Samuel Little understood his victims would be missed slowly, if at all. Women estranged from family, living transient lives, addicted, working the margins. When they disappeared, reports were filed. Sometimes investigations, sometimes. But urgency, media attention, national manhunts, rarely. Little knew this. He counted on it. The geographic spread of his crimes, 19 states, meant no single jurisdiction saw the full pattern. A detective in Florida couldn't know about a cold case in Ohio. A medical examiner in Texas couldn't connect to an overdose in Nevada. Little exploited the fragmentation of American law enforcement, moving constantly, leaving clusters of death that looked like unrelated tragedies. It wasn't until DNA technology advanced, until databases could cross-reference genetic markers across jurisdictions, until a Texas Ranger took the time to build rapport rather than apply pressure, that the true scope emerged. Samuel Little killed for 35 years. He might have killed forever if not for a random arrest on a narcotics charge in Louisville, Kentucky, at age 72. Samuel Little spent his final years in California State Prison, transferred from Los Angeles County to federal custody as part of his deal with investigators. He lived in a medical unit, his health failing, diabetes, heart disease, the accumulated damage of decades of hard living. He died on December 30th, 2020, 80 years old. He took secrets to his grave. Of the 93 murders he confessed to, only 60 were confirmed. 33 women may never be identified. Their families may never know what happened. Their names may never be spoken again. But he also gave something back. Those sketches, the detailed confessions, the victim identifications, dozens of cold cases closed because a dying man finally decided to talk. Not for redemption, Little never expressed remorse, never asked for forgiveness. He confessed because he wanted to move prisons, because he wanted attention, because he was a narcissist who finally had an audience. The motives don't matter to the families who finally learned what happened to their sisters, their mothers, their daughters. Closure matters, names matter, the truth matters, even when it comes from a monster. Gillian Lauren, an author who spent over 40 hours interviewing Little in prison, wrote a book, Behold the Monster. She called him exactly that, not a supervillain, not a genius, but a monster who preyed on the vulnerable for decades, while institutions looked away. Starz produced a documentary confronting a serial killer, featuring her interviews. The title captures the essential horror. You can confront him, you can document him, but you can't undo what he did. Samuel Little stands alone in American criminal history. Not for his brutality, there are killers more violent. Not for his cunning, there are killers more sophisticated. But for his sheer volume, for the duration of his spree, for the number of victims across the greatest geographic spread, he is unprecedented. 60 confirmed murders, 93 confessed, 19 states, 35 years, a method manual strangulation chosen specifically because it left minimal evidence, because it allowed him to operate invisibly among populations society had already abandoned. The system failed his victims at every turn. Medical examiners misclassified deaths, police departments didn't share information, courts acquitted him despite evidence, and through it all, Little moved again, knowing exactly what he was doing, choosing his victims with sadistic care. Texas Ranger James Holland gave many of those victims their names back. The DNA database gave prosecutors the evidence they needed, but nothing can give those 60 women their lives back. Nothing can erase 35 years of terror Little inflicted across America. He died in 2020, unrepentant, unforgiven, largely unnamed until his final years. Now his name is attached to the worst serial killing spree in US history. It's a legacy of horror, but it's also a record of investigation, of how persistence, technology, and one Texas Ranger's patience finally brought a monster into the light. The women Samuel Little killed were daughters, sisters, mothers. They had names, histories, people who loved them. For too long they were statistics. Cold cases, Jane does now. Thanks to confessions he gave only to serve himself, many of them have been reclaimed. Their stories matter, their lives mattered, and their deaths, however late, will not go unrecorded. Samuel Little wanted recognition. He wanted to be remembered. Be careful what you wish for.